Good Shantif. Good Shantif, Josh Breitzer, and Shana Tova. Tonight, as we gather here for the beginning of our high holiday season and the formal start to a new year, we're also with Labor Day, marking the informal end of summer. And I hope that over the past few months, many of you have had the opportunity to spend some time away. And I'm pleased to say that for the first time in, I don't really remember how long, I also got the chance to go away for a large part of the summer. Now, you may know that it's unusual for rabbis to take a significant chunk of time away. And if you've ever wondered what a rabbi looks like on vacation, it's not so different from other people: sandals, shorts, a few gin and tonics. But then, of course, there is this one notable difference.
Good afternoon, Rabbi Matt Green. This is Susan Levy calling, a friend as well as a congregant. Just calling to check, where have you been? We haven't seen you on services. Are you on vacation somewhere, on a long vacation? Anyway, just hoping you're around and are well.
All right. They all wonder where you are. Now, just in case you were worried, I checked with Susan ahead of time. It's totally okay. But that gives you some idea of what it's like for rabbis to go on vacation. And because I can't help myself, I'm just going to play a little bit more. Just here we go.
I think Judy Wild said she spotted you the other day, so you might be back in Brooklyn. Anyway, I had emailed you once or twice, but haven't heard. So I'm just calling as a friendly friend. All right, when you have a chance, give me a call.
All right, we're going to stop it there. She does go on. But Susan, where are you, Susan? Raise your hand. Susan. I missed you, Susan. And also Judy Wild. I don't know if you're here too. That was very, very sweet. And from the many other texts and voicemails that I received, it seems that Susan wasn't the only one to realize the uniqueness of a rabbi going away on a long vacation. Now let's be real. I love being in this kind of community where members check in on one another and on their rabbis when they're not around. It was unusual for me to go on vacation for such a long time. As someone who speaks from the Bima almost every week about the value of rest, this summer gave me the chance to practice what I literally preach. As it happens, this Rosh Hashanah marks the 7th year that both Rabbi Timoner and I have served this community. And some rabbis take a sabbatical in their 7th year, which probably won't be in the cards for us. But as I went away, at least not right now, I don't know, that was a knowing glance, okay. Or who knows, hopefully someday. But as I went away, these past couple months, I kind of imagined my time off as a mini sabbatical, giving me the chance to breathe and also get back in touch with what it means to really rest. In my own time away, and in the trips that many of my peers took, I observed that there seemed to be basically 2 categories of vacation. On the one hand, you have the vacation that seems a little bit like a party, letting loose and having fun in the way that we can't normally during a typical work week. This is where the gin and tonics come in handy. And at one point this summer, I was on a week-long adventure at a resort where the very explicit goal was for travelers to forget about the tsuris of normal life, to take on new identities, to take risks, to consume as much as possible, and in essence, to avoid reality. Before it seems like I'm about to condemn this mode of rest, let's be clear, it was an awesome week. It reminded me a little bit of Purim, taking on a new identity and imbibing to avoid the painful reality of life. But then you have another kind of vacation, sometimes interspersed with partying and sometimes isolated unto itself, which I would call a retreat. Going out into the woods or the mountains, or even doing something closer to home that allows you to just be. to recalibrate and recenter and renew. Just a couple days after my week at the resort, I drove up to the Adirondacks to be with friends for this kind of rest. And the goal here was not so much to let loose as it was to be still, not to dance, but to sit. And obviously also to canoe and hike and maybe have a few more gin and tonics, but to really sit away from civilization, away from social expectations, and to be still. If the first trip was Purim, this was a little more like Shabbat, taking a breath instead of taking a step, and being present with myself. Neither form of rest is inherently better than the other, and both are probably necessary at different times. After all, the Jewish calendar commands both kinds of experiences. Sometimes it's useful to be intoxicated, and sometimes it's important to be radically awake. But it's essential to understand the difference. And even if these modes of being are so distinct from one another, many of us frequently confuse or elide the two. In Hebrew, one word for alcohol is shechar, as in shikur or shikar in Yiddish, shin chaf resh. The word is almost identical to sin chaf resh, where all that changes between the two is the dot above the letter. But if you read it as sin chaf resh, sachar or schar, you get a word meaning reward. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference. Shechar can feel like sachar, especially after a long week. Sometimes the intoxication and escape of certain kinds of fun can feel like the reward of true rest. But shechar and sachar are two dramatically distinct kinds of experiences. The little dot above the letter making it a shin or a sin makes all the difference. And if we're looking for the reward of true rest, intoxication may be a backward step. For this, sachar, the reward of rest, no amount of escape will help you. Dancing and drinking and even being happy may be tools of avoidance, whereby a true retreat or recalibration remains elusive. Instead, digging deep is what's required. The Talmudic sages offer us a famous phrase, drosh v'kabel schar, which means that in order to receive a reward, you have to study, examine, expound. Our rabbis believe that in order to experience the meaning of Torah, you have to interrogate it. Sigmund Freud, in our High Holiday Prayer Book, might add that in order to experience the meaning of life, you have to interrogate it. And this, I think, is the point of a retreat. Not merely to have fun, but to dive deep into yourself, to sit as still as possible, and to emerge more awake to what it means to be alive. Each of us here tonight has a special reason to understand the distinctions between different types of time off. Because the year that we are gathered now to celebrate 5782 is a Shemitah year, meaning a sabbatical year in the agricultural calendar of the land of Israel. Tonight, we enter a biblically ordained year of rest, the 7th year in the cycle of the land. And though most of us here tonight are not Israeli farmers, we still have an invitation to consider what this year of rest might look like, beginning with this evening. It's odd in a way to think about 5782, this year that we're entering, as the year that we should take time off. After all, what have we been doing for a year and a half? Sitting at home in front of our computer screens and watching television, taking up hobbies, maybe drinking more alcohol than normal, unable to hustle and produce the way we normally might. But all of that stuff was by and large an attempt at escaping. We did what we needed to do to get through the pandemic and feel okay. And this, I think, was the right move. After all, Jews throughout history have had plenty of reasons to want to have little Purim escapism every springtime. And so did we during the last year and a half. But now, as we approach the next phase of the pandemic, moving through the mercurial headspace of vaccines and breakthrough cases, it's time for a real retreat in the sense of Shemitah. Whether we're thinking of our personal lives or of our collective, it's time to not avoid or run away from, but to sit with what we have become. The notion of Shemitah or sabbatical is first mentioned in the book of Exodus. We read, "You may plant your land for 6 years and gather its crops, but during the 7th year you must leave it alone and withdraw from it. The needy among you will then be able to eat just as you do." From its biblical beginnings, Shemitah was all about recalibrating society as much as it was about restoring the land itself. It took the idea of Shabbat and extended it to a yearly cycle of sustaining the planet. This, of course, should give us pause as we confront a warming earth and unprecedented weather patterns, but it's just as useful for us to consider in our lives. We who do not own farms can still benefit from the idea of a year-long period of retreat and release. There are also explicit connections between Shemitah and the High Holy Day season. Leviticus refers to Shemitah as Shabbat Shabbaton, the Shabbat of all Shabbats, which is also the phrase the Torah uses for Yom Kippur, signifying that Shemitah, like Yom Kippur, carries with it a spiritual aspect of release. When Shemitah was first reintroduced by modern Jewish farmers in the land of Israel, the foremost Ashkenazi spiritual authority of that time was Abraham Isaac Kook. Rav Kook was an avowed proponent of Shemitah, and for him, the goal of the sabbatical year was not merely to respect the earth and let it rest, but to teach a lesson to all those who till it. He wrote, "Stilling the tumult of social life from time to time in certain predictable ways is meant to move this nation, when it is well ordered, to rise toward an encounter with the heights of its inner moral and spiritual life." Rav Kook is saying that the purpose of Shemitah is to still ourselves, and in our stillness to perfect ourselves and our world. Only in stillness can we encounter the divine within ourselves that allows us to move forward. We may be more inclined these days, after Delta has ruined so many of our vaccinated plans, to act out, to get angry, perhaps to drink, to do whatever it takes to forget how horrible the world seems at times. But the goal of 5782 might be the opposite, to sit with how horrible things have felt for so long, to try hard not to avoid the pain, and to see what comes up for us. Tomorrow morning, as we chant the text of Unatana Tokef, we'll hear one of the most iconic sentences of our Machzor, Uv shofar gadol yitaka v'kol dmama daka yishama. The great shofar is sounded, and a still small voice is heard. This phrasing comes from the prophecy of Elijah in the book of Kings, when Elijah encounters a mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks. But God was not in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire. Rather, after the fire, it was in the still small voice that Elijah perceived his prophecy. As we hear the shofar on this holiday, we get a chance to leave room for that still small voice within ourselves. Entering the Shemitah year, how will we do that? What will it take for us to sit still for a moment, or maybe this week, or perhaps at different moments periodically throughout all of the year? Most of us won't be able to take a sabbatical away from our responsibilities this year, taking leaves of absence from our lives. Fortunately, Shemitah implies the opposite, beckoning us to be radically present. We fool ourselves into thinking that only going away for a wild adventure will restore us, when really, the kind of rest, release, and recalibration we might pursue this year requires sitting, wherever we are, in these pews, on your couches or chairs at home, and allowing ourselves to sit still. May each of us find the ability during these days to center ourselves and set ourselves up for a real Shemitah, a year of sitting still. And if at times we feel a little overwhelmed by that still small voice within ourselves, may we find friends who check in on us, like Susan Levy, who notice and with whom we might sit together. Shana Tova.